Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. For this episode, well, it's just going to be a addendum to the heavy metallurgy episode from last Friday, covering this year in metal 2010. I wasn't able to be on that episode. I had a family commitment going on, but I enjoy the This Year in Metal series, and so I thought I'd kind of quickly go through my list of albums from 2010. Marty, Lee, and Roger kind of touched on the year in general, and so I'll add just a few thoughts. Uh, they kind of hinted that they felt like maybe it was a bit of a slow year or down year in heavy metal. I mean, there are always good releases every year. If you dig around enough, you can find them. But 2010 does feel like a slightly odd year. The big releases for that year, I think, are things such as Bring Me the Horizon, and especially the Ghost album. What is it? Epicus Eponymous or something? I don't even know the name of the album because Ghost just isn't my thing. I've checked them out several times. It's just not for me, and that's okay. But I think some of the focus in heavy metal that year was more in that kind of stuff, which falls a little bit outside of the heavy metallurgy typical listening list. Other things that came out that year, I mean, a big one, Iron Maiden had an album, but it was The Final Frontier, which is not generally regarded as one of their better albums and not one I particularly enjoy that much either. So yeah, I can see why folks may have felt like it was a slightly odd, maybe down year in metal. It's also early enough that two movements that are very popular today were sort of in their early phases. The new wave of traditional heavy metal was underway, but was still relatively underground. And the old school death metal revival was also not at all in full swing just yet. So, and I think that's reflected in the picks I have, that there's not a ton of things from those two styles. So yeah, 2010 might have been a slightly unusual year, a bit of a transitional year for metal, where some things that now have been popular for years hadn't quite hit full steam yet. But without further ado, let me go through my album list. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any of these. Some of these were mentioned by the guys during the stream, some of them weren't. We'll start with Panopticons. This one on the subject of mortality. It's one of my favorite Panopticon albums and one of the first ones I heard from them. This one focuses a lot on dealing with loss of someone that you loved and not just thinking about what comes after or yeah, how do I carry on without you, but thinking more about like what type of legacy do you leave and how long will that legacy be remembered? Will you be remembered 2 generations from now? How much do you actually remember about your grandparents and their lives? Do you know anything about your grandparents' existence, your great grandparents' existence? Time kind of erases all of us. And I found this to be a very powerful album, very emotional, but on a very personal level. Not just emotional in terms of it sounds sad or it sounds angry, but in terms of here's somebody who's really trying to communicate their feelings and how they're dealing with a specific situation with the rest of the world. And I think it's incredibly well done. All right. Now, more releases. These, by the way, are not in any particular order. Kind of grouped the rest of them by genre on the CD stacks. We'll begin with a couple of things that are not quite heavy metal, but have some appeal. Ashbury released Something Funny Going On. This is a hard rock band out of Arizona. They're metal adjacent. They released one album in the early 80s that a lot of metalheads have always enjoyed. It had kind of an underground cult status for independent releases. The band, it's two guys. Um, they've had some success getting to appear at things, Keep It True in some of these retro festivals, highlighting older, more obscure acts. Again, it's just nice guitar harmony driven hard rock material. They've got kind of a laid back sound that harkens a lot to Southern rock more than anything else. They're very good musicians, good singers, good songwriters. I enjoy their stuff. They've done a few new albums since they kind of, got rediscovered in the 21st century. And yeah, Something Funny Coming On is really good stuff if you like that style. Only one other for the non-metal category. House of Lords released Cartesian Dreams. This was an 80s band that always incorrectly got lumped in with glam metal because that's what we did with everything in the 80s. We didn't really think of things as hard rock. If you were hard rock, you probably just got put in with the glam crowd. House of Lords may have looked glam, but that was just because almost everybody looked kind of glamish. Everybody back then had the same fashion, the same, hair, the same perm, whatever. But their music didn't fit with the glam category. They made a few albums that were quite good, but they were kind of lost in a sea of stuff during the late 80s, despite having some connections to Gene Simmons and a member of Angel in the band originally. So yeah, three albums, they called it a day, but they came back and have had a long, successful run since then. Cartesian Dreams is maybe like the fourth or fifth album after they got back together in the late 90s, moving forward. This is not their best album, certainly not their worst album. It's a very solid House of Lords album. I've always liked James Christiansen's voice. He's got a very distinctive sound, and they're still going strong today. They've released some of their best material just in the past 5 years or so. All right, let's move over into the progressive power traditional metal stack. Seventh Wonder from Sweden. They released The Great Escape. This was kind of their breakout album. The previous album got a lot of attention, but it was a very long and sort of complicated concept album. This one is just a collection of fantastic songs. If you like the idea of progressive metal, but don't want it to devolve into overly technical showmanship, Seventh Wonder is perfect. Amazing vocalist. Tony now sings with Camelot. The songs here are very song oriented. That's a very song focused band, but they have amazing compositional and playing skills. So this is definitely a great album. Kind of, I guess you'd say their peak, although I've enjoyed most of their work. Up next, in the early days of new wave of traditional heavy metal, you had Zool. This was a really great band from the US. They only released two albums. I'm pretty sure they were both on Cruz del Sur, although this looks like it's a different pressing. Maybe getting some of the details wrong there. Sorry. Yeah, this was a Planet Metal release. This is their second album, Out of Time. This was a very fun band. The guys had a real penchant for new wave of British heavy metal. They did a lot of fun covers of obscure songs like Crucifixion and Badger. Made a couple of albums, couple of singles. It's a good, high energy, very catchy, nicely done style. It doesn't feel derivative, doesn't feel like they're copycatting stuff from 20 years earlier. They're just doing really solid heavy metal. It's a real shame that they didn't catch on. This may be a case of where they were a little too early in the new wave of traditional metal movement. If they had come along 5 or 10 years later, they might have gotten more traction. Let's see, Marty touched on this one briefly. The first album from Atlantean Codex, The Golden Bough. This is just my band. I love this band to death. And while this album does feel a little rougher around the edges than the two that have come since it, it is still an amazing A plus type of album. It's epic heavy metal, Hammerheart era Bathory meets classic early Manowar. Vocalist has like a very clean, pure singing voice. Kind of, you'd think he would be a power metal singer based on his capabilities. And that's one of the things that makes Atlantean Codex stand out. A lot of bands in this kind of epic style, as Marty pointed out, they tend to have vocalists that are unusual, kind of quirky. That often is fine. But I really like the fact that here you got somebody who harkens back again to the early Manowar template. Eric Adams doesn't have a quirky voice or a strange voice. He's just got an amazing voice, and he still sounds great in his 70s. Vocalist here, same thing. Just clean, golden, perfect voice for this kind of material. Makes the band stand out. They're my favorite band of the 21st century. We also have Accept, Blood of Nations, here, of course, featuring their new vocalist. Good album. Had the title track is a real banger. It's quite the anthem, one of my favorites from their later catalog. Except, yeah, as we've gotten more and more albums with this lineup, the albums get a little samey, a little interchangeable. I don't feel like it's necessary to latch onto every one of them, but I do like Blood of Nations. This one gets repeat plays from time to time when I'm in the mood. Let's see. Now, Marty, you touched on all the big German power metal bands. You had four big ones that released things in 2010. Blind Guardian did At the Edge of Time. This is the last Blind Guardian album I can quickly give like a, yeah, thumbs up to. The material since this one has not been as good in my opinion. I know a lot of folks like the God Machine, and there's nothing wrong with the God Machine. I just don't think it really stands out. It was cool to see them return to their earlier power speed stuff, but that's all the album does. It does things that the band had already done decades earlier. This one is pretty solid. Same opinion as Marty. Good album, not at their peak. Blind Guardian kind of peaked in the late 90s, early 2000s. Still a good live act, but yeah, the albums haven't been quite as good. I didn't pull all the other ones, but I feel like the other German power metal bands kind of the same take. The Gamma Ray album, the Halloween album, both of those are good, but not at the top or near the top of their respective discographies. The Rage album, something something web in the title, that's one I'm not that keen about. I do differ with Marty on that one. The Rage albums that lean more into the symphonic side of things or get a little too lightweight in song construction, I don't think that's Rage's strong suit. I like the Rage albums that are a little heavier, more forceful. If they're bringing in the symphony for backing, I can pass on that material. The power metal album, though, for me from 2010 is this one, which Marty did highlight as well. It's Wuthering Heights with their Salt album. I think these guys are from Denmark, if I remember correctly. I tend to get their country of origin wrong. They made a handful of excellent albums. The first one or two are kind of average, but after that, they hit their stride with a new vocalist. The performances on here are top notch. It's a concept album. It doesn't tell a story, it's just that all the songs have to do with boats, sailing, sailors, stuff of that nature. The lyrics are one of the outstanding parts of this album. If you appreciate bands like Sabbath and Skyclad, or like early Cradle of Filth, guys who really are wordsmiths, then Wuthering Heights is something you should check out. It's incredibly well written lyrically, very poetic, lots of great wordplay, but not in a cheesy way that like Skyclad kind of devolved into. This is excellent stuff. One of the best albums, not just of 2010, but of the 2010s, the decade. All right, let's switch to a couple of heavier, maybe doomier-ish things. You've got Electric Wizard with Black Masses. I kind of like Electric Wizard, but I'm rarely in the mood to listen to them. I got several of their early albums. I purchased MP3 downloads years ago, and I'll play them once in a great while, but it's not often. This is the only one I have a hard copy of currently. And again, it's fun when I'm in the mood. It's just not a mood I get into very often whatsoever. We also had the last really solid Danzig album, Death Red Sabbath. The Danzig albums after four got very experimental. People have different takes on those, everything from sell out and following the crowd to being brave enough to try new and different things. That is a discussion for another time. We're not doing the Danzig discography right now. Death Red Sabbath was viewed as something of a return to form. It doesn't sound exactly like stuff from those classic first four albums, but it's the closest he had gotten since those albums. So a lot of fans, myself included, were pleasantly surprised when this came out. And I was like, oh, hey, well, it's cool to hear him go back and try that once again. I haven't heard every Danzig release since this one came out. Of the ones I've heard, nothing seems like it's really essential. All right, last one for this kind of, heavier end is Acid Witch, their second album, Stoned. Yeah, the deal here is Acid Witch is kind of a bit of a campy band. The picture here shows you, they're very much into, Halloween and horror and metal. Not that any of that's unusual for heavy metal fans, but the song titles are all also, they're meant to be kind of just, jokey, fun stuff. The music is quite heavy. Um, I do like the song title Witch Finder Finder. That's just fun. But they also have Metal Movie Marijuana Massacre Meltdown. So like every good compilation you can think of somehow crammed together. The deal with Acid Wish, however, is that like a lot of bands that are meant to be kind of jokey or campy, it's really fun the first time you hear it, but the amusement steps down pretty rapidly with each subsequent listen. So Acid Witch is like, okay, yeah, that's fun, cool gimmick, but I really need to revisit the gimmick. It's like hearing the same joke over and over. After you've heard it a couple of times, you know the punchline. Why do you want to hear the same joke? Mm, it's okay, but not one I'm ever going to dive deep into. As I mentioned before, death metal is maybe one that there were good death metal releases out. You know, Roger showed several, Marty showed several, but it's 2010 doesn't seem like it was a banner year for death metal. I had only two to mention. Immolation, Majesty and Decay. This is one of the later Immolation albums where it feels like that's a solid album, but it is also just another Immolation album. Immolation's average albums are better than most bands' best album. But at the same time, after those first five or so Immolation albums, you do feel like they rarely completely nail it again. There are some highlights later in their catalog, like Atonement, but a lot of the albums, Majesty and Decay and such, is like, it's fine. All right, how often are you going to play Majesty and Decay over any of the first five albums? You know, when you're at best the sixth best album in a band's discography, you're just not going to get many spins. Unless all you listen to is Immolation. If you do, that's cool. I tend to listen to a lot of different bands, so Majesty and Decay, perfectly respectable album. Nothing really wrong with it I can put my finger on, but it's not rarely going to make it to the top of the heap in terms of getting a chance to re-listen to it. Only other death metal one I pulled was Hail of Bullets. I think this is the second one on Divine Wings. Yeah, this is Martin Van Drunen when he's kind of in between his residencies with Asphyx. Marty mentioned that, yes, on Metallurgy, we'll be doing a Martin Van Drunen episode in a couple of weeks. So we're just focusing on the albums he did with various projects, Pestilence, Autopsy, Hail of Bullets, and others. Should be a really fun show. I know a lot of his albums. I don't know all of them. So I've got some homework to do in the next few weeks. But Hail of Bullets, if you like his work with Asphyx, you'll probably like Hail of Bullets. All right, let's get into black metal. This is the stack where I've got the most stuff pulled. So I guess you'd say 2010 was a black metal year, if anything. And there are some big visible releases that came out. One of the biggest was Agalloch, album number four, Marrow of the Spirit. Many folks don't seem that keen on this album. I've always thought it's very, very good, though I'll admit I don't play it often. It does have a sort of darker, dirtier, grittier sound relative to their first three albums, and I think that's quite okay. I liked that Agalloch changed the sound a little bit on each album, gives each one its own personality, and I like the personality of Marrow of the Spirit. Another big one for 2010 was Deathspell Omega's Paracletus. This is album number five for them. It's the third and last in the Trinity. Let's be honest, the first two Deathspell Omega albums nobody really talks about because they are extremely average. If Deathspell Omega had disappeared after those first two albums, people would remember them for one reason only, and that's having a really cool name. However, after album number two, they kind of ratcheted things up to a new level and literally turned the black metal universe on its head with the release of C Circumspice. That's not right. C Monumentum requires Circumspice. I always trip over that name a bit. And it was kind of, the album that made orthodox black metal burst out into the black metal mainstream, and a thousand bands have followed in their wake. It was the first of the trilogy. Paracletus is the third, last one in the trilogy. It's probably the easiest of the three to get into, and that is relatively speaking, because Deathspell Omega is not that easy to get into. The albums can be quite dense. There's a lot of layers to the stuff. But I find this one a lot more digestible than the first two volumes. Not saying those are bad. I'm just saying that this one is easier to start wrapping your brain around. It's extremely well done. DSO is not to everybody's liking. There are, of course, controversies about the band's vocalist. If you're somebody who wants to avoid those bands with those kind of connections, I get it. DSO is not for you, no problem. I don't listen to DSO often, but I do find them interesting. They are very good musicians. They're good songwriters. It's unfortunate that, yeah, there's some baggage associated with them. All right, also in the orthodox black metal realm, we have Sweden's Onskap with Arise from the Ashes. Roger showed this one kind of late in the show, maybe when they were starting to wrap up. Yeah, this is their third album. Onskap are sort of a no nonsense, no frills, orthodox black metal band. And if you're not clear about orthodox black metal, in the very late 90s, early 2000s, some bands started trying to take the whole satanic angle and imagery, the satanic centric focus of black metal and treat it more seriously. Instead of just being Satan good, burn thing, me evil, it was more, let's talk about Satanism from like a metaphysical perspective and what does it actually mean to be Luciferian, this kind of stuff. Decibel Omega is the band that's most visible in that style, but there were other bands tinkering with it before DSO were. Onskap were a very early band. They did two albums early in the 2000s. Then there's a few years off. Then this comes out. I think this is one of their better ones. The first two albums, which I'm not overly familiar with, I've heard all of them, but I don't know them inside out. The first two albums I remember being decent, but not overly exciting. On albums three and four, I felt like Onskap, up to their game a little bit. The albums feel a little more dynamic. There's more things to latch onto in the songs. So yeah, good album from Onskap. The band just broke up, so nothing else coming from them in the near future. Jumping to the US for a couple of black metal releases, you had Ludicra with The Tenant. This is a tricky album for me. I've always had some trouble getting into this one because it is very unconventional black metal. By this point, Ludicra had drifted away from black metal. They weren't as interested in it as they had been a decade earlier. They were always an unconventional black metal band. Something I've figured out with this album. If I try to listen to this expecting black metal or wanting to hear black metal, I come away a bit disappointed. But if I listen to The Tenant just wanting to hear like, yeah, a kind of complex metal album with blackened metal vocal performance and a really good vocal performance at that, then I get more out of The Tenant. So at least for me, the trick here is not to think of this as a black metal album because I think it's drifted a little far from the style. It just still has the blackened vocal approach. But it does have some interesting stuff going on. I just had to rewire my brain to not treat it like a, quote unquote generic black metal release. Another unusual US black metal release is Celestial. And let's get the title of this one right. Where Life Springs Eternal. I think it's the second and last album from the Celestial project. This was one of Tanner Anderson's projects. I have this with the black metal, but again, unusual. It also has like a lot of sort of funeral doom in it and a lot of just ambient instrumental stuff going on. So it's very cool, interesting world building, very immersive kind of sound. But yeah, this is not Dark Throne or Judas Iscariot or anything like that. It has an unusual track list. There's five songs, but of those five songs, three of them are kind of like normal length, 3, 4, 5 minute instrumental tracks. And then you have a 30-minute song and a 16-minute song. So you have these two very long compositions and then three short to average compositions. It's not something I play very often, but it does have a pretty cool and unique sound. Uh, when you want exactly that type of ambience, if you're in the mood for it, Celestial is a really cool listen. I think both the Celestial albums have been out of print for a while. All right, a few more black metal ones to wrap up with here quickly. From Greece, we have Akarantas. They released their second album called Theosis. I don't know a lot about Akarantas. I've ended up with a couple of things here and there by the band. They've been on a lot of splits, for example. They've released a ton of albums over the past 20 years. Theosis is one that has pretty favorable reviews online if you poke around. They've done a lot of later albums become like these part, 2 and 3 part kind of things. This predates those. Acronyms very much focuses on kind of the occult hermetic style of black metal. So not orthodox black metal per se, But yeah, doing some of the same, playing up, the mystical and mysterious sides. They're a band based on the stuff I've heard. They often sound like that's not bad. It has potential, but I've yet to hear the album that really draws me in, like, here. Yeah, this is the album where it all falls into place. So yeah, Theosis is one of those that's pretty good, but it's one of those bands that like, keep an eye on them maybe. Now again, just for full disclosure, some of the members in Acherontes were in a previous band that is viewed as kind of sketchy. I don't remember the details. I think they were one of those bands named after like a German concentration camp, something like that. So again, if you are someone who avoids bands with those kind of connections or connotations, Acherontis may not be for you. The members have said they left that stuff behind in the old project, that they didn't want Acherontis to have anything to do with that. Fair enough. Yeah. At the same time, Acherontis has had a lot of releases on labels with very clear ties to, NS stuff. They appear on some splits with bands that, yeah, are kind of sketchy. So it kind of depends on what your comfort level is. If you want nothing to do with any of that, okay, you probably should not check out Acherontis. Eh, if you're less worried about that kind of stuff or you're into that kind of stuff, might be a band you like. Again, all of that aside, I feel like they're a decent band. They've never really won me over completely. Next up, we have um Austrian black metal, Mestigens, Son of All Sons. This is a reissue. The original cover art is different and better, although this isn't too bad. The original also has the band's logo on the front, which I always thought was a pretty cool looking logo. This band has only done a couple of albums and a bunch of splits, EPs, all that kind of normal stuff. They're not very well known. I guess their quote unquote biggest claim to fame is there's some tangential connections to Abigor. Some of the members were in like Abigor back in their first demo stages. And also Silenius has done vocals with Amestigen as well. Although it's a little confusing regarding which releases he has sang on, which ones he hasn't. You'd have to dig into it if you wanted to know exactly. Regardless, Son of All Sons and the Amestigen project, it doesn't really sound like Abigor. And when I'm saying that, I understand, yes, Abigor has changed their sound significantly over the years, but I don't feel like this is Abigor Jr. or Abigor wannabe. Amestigen has their own sound, and it's a pretty interesting one. It has a little more modern take on black metal, and all I mean by that is it's not trying to be Cascadian, it's not trying to be nature focused or woodsy or medieval. It's not focused on ye old sound of Scandinavian ancestors from 1,000 years ago. It's not dealing with those kind of things. But the songs tend to be well put together and constructed. There's a couple on here that I feel maybe aren't as good as the others. The second album's even better than this one. And some of the stuff they've released, like on compilations and all, they've got some good songs here and there too. So, a good band, interesting band if you like Austrian black metal. It's worth checking out. But don't go into it expecting it to sound like, Nocturne from Abigor. If you do that, you're going to be disappointed. Speaking of Abigor, they released Time is the Sulfur in the Veins of the Saint in 2010. And I know it looks like I'm holding a plain black box, but there's some very, very faint green stuff. It's not going to show up on camera. It barely shows up when I'm holding it right here in front of my face at different angles. When I found this in a used bin, it really was funny. It's just like, is this a Spinal Tap album? Because how much more black could it be? And I started to flip past it. I'm like, Jesus, I don't even know what that is. But I thought, I ought to at least see what the heck that is. So I had to like open it up, flip through the books, like, okay. I had never seen a copy of this before. So yeah, picked it up. This is from Abigor's comeback phase. At the end of the 90s, they sort of dissolved the band or put it on hiatus. But in the 2000s, they got back together and started playing a more technical style, I guess is what you'd say, compared to what they had done before. With this album, it has just a couple of compositions on it. They're like 20 minutes each. They are very dense and very technically put together. An anecdote that'll explain it. When Radical Research podcast covered, they did an episode on Abigor a couple of years ago, just kind of highlighting some different things through the catalog. When they were discussing Time is the Sulfur, one of the guys said, this album feels like it had to be stitched together in like 45-second snippets, just to emphasize how insanely complex and technical the stuff is. It's kind of like, it's a joke, of course, but it is apt. The emphasis here is how you couldn't have played this for like long spans of time and gotten it correct. You be like, okay, guys, 60 seconds, go. Okay, we got that 60 seconds recorded right. Let's reset. Let's talk about what do we play for the next 60 seconds? Okay, hit record. Get that. Now we'll just splice those two together. Okay, we got 2 minutes done, 18 more minutes to go to finish this song. That's the level of difficulty you're dealing with on Time is the Sulfur. I think it's brilliant. I really like that era of Abigor with that album and Fractal Possession. I understand it's not going to be for everybody. It is a difficult listen. You don't throw it on for easy listening whatsoever. For some context with something that might be better known, I'd say it's analogous to the situation with Gorguts and Obscura. That on Obscura, they were so over the top that it becomes a hard album for a lot of people to fathom or digest. That's kind of what Abigor was doing in a black metal context with Fractal Possession, but really, especially on Time is the Sulfur. But I'm on board for that one. All right, last and certainly not least, from Japan, we have Psy with Scenes from Hell. This is another fantastic Psy album. I've always enjoyed almost all of this band's output. Some albums are, of course, better than others. Another band who reinvent themselves constantly. They have a new album coming out later this year. I'm excited to see what they do this time out. I haven't played Scenes from Hell in a long time. My recollection is that this one is a little sort of faster, more caustic, more straightforward. Slayer meets Venom meets black metal. Overall, it's still going to have plenty of Psy weirdness in it, but my recollection, and hey, feel free to correct me if I'm off on this one in the comments, but my recollection is this one's a little more ferocious and feral, a little less weird and experimental, but still a really good part of the Psy catalog. It has unfortunately gotten a little hard to find copies of this, so they tend to be expensive secondhand. That's happened to a lot of stuff that came out on the End Records. A lot of that early 2000s stuff that at the time was just normal releases. The Agalot catalog is kind of like this. Those things have been out of print for a long time now, and so prices have crept up, unfortunately. I got lucky and found this very cheap several years ago, but it's not always easy to do that with this one. Now, the early Psy material, those first few albums on Cacophonous from the 90s, those have gotten reissued this year by Peaceville. So those are finally available for a good price. Hopefully, someone picks up the End catalog and starts to reissue some of that stuff. A lot of these albums are 20 years old now. And yeah, a lot of people would like to get a copy of them. The Agalot catalog's another good example of that. Marrow of the Spirits, not an easy or cheap CD to find. You're not going to pick it up for $5 on 18 different Discogs lists anymore. With Agalot being back together, I think there's a chance we do see some reissues of those in the near to median future. I don't know if there's any plans to get the End material from Psy reissued, but hey, at least the Cacophonous material to get released. That's always been the hardest stuff to find and the most expensive. That's it. That's my list from 2010. So now let's talk about it in the comments down below. What are your favorite things that were released in 2010? Your top five, top three, whatever you feel like listing. And what are your general impressions of 2010 as that year in metal? Was it an outstanding year for you personally? And me and the guys on Metallurgy have just missed some key things? Do you think it was a terrible year for metal? I haven't ranked the years or anything like that. Might be a fun project to do sometime. But yeah, I'd say 2010, as I showed, I had no problem finding like 24 albums here to talk about. But it does feel like a year that may have been a little bit light in terms of like big flashy releases that have had a long sort of track record of holding up well. But again, that may also just be the kinds of metal I like. Maybe those albums by Bring Me the Horizon and bands such as that are massive staples in that community, and I'm just not aware of it because it's just not for me. The Ghost album, of course, has become a real benchmark for that style. So there were certainly some things to kind of plant your flag for in 2010, I think. All right, that'll do it. Until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.